Hey guys, I'm hoping to do this occasionally where I just post an uncut video of a training session and I just kind of talk through it. They're not going to be edited at all really, and I'm just going to do a basic voiceover just kind of explaining what I'm doing. So with this session, I am trying to work on steering with him. He is 3 years old. He'll be 4 in March, and I'll start sitting on him then. But I want him to be really comfortable with all the cues that I'll need to safely ride on him. So sometimes he gets distracted by, there's horses all the way if you look in the very far pasture, there's horses across the street and up the hill that he sometimes likes to watch. So it took me a minute to get his attention there, and I'm offering him the reins for him to put his head through, and that's kind of how I get him to more or less agree to training. Sometimes I'll just train him completely at liberty with no tack, and he can leave at any point with that. But when I am using a bridle or a neck rope, I try to give him the option to engage or not, because I really don't want him running off with my bridle on. And this is a Micklem without a bit. So right now I'm just kind of getting that put on and getting it all adjusted, and I reward him when he is accepting of it and stands still. And there, I just threw my halter out of the way. So what I'm doing is I'm trying to use incredibly light rein cues to get him to steer. And I've already kind of established him going to the stationary targets on the ground. You can see these tiny little plastic cones, and they're kind of scattered everywhere. And so I'm just kind of using a super light rein cue to influence which one I want him to go. So it's set up in kind of a zigzag pattern, and you can see he's doing really well at this. Later on, I change up the pattern that we're doing. And when I'm using these stationary targets, what I've been trying to do is I'll ask him to walk on, and then I'll gently steer him towards the one I want him to go, and then I'll say target if I actually want him to touch it. And then once he touches it with his nose, he gets rewarded for that. I do not reward him if I haven't said target, and I just built that in because I wanted to make sure that if he saw something he thought was a target someday down the road, I didn't want him to get into a dangerous situation or maybe touch something he shouldn't unless I had asked him to specifically target it, because I didn't want that to be something that became a problem later. So right here again, I'm just asking him to walk on, and then I'm gently steering with the bitless bridle with just a tiny bit of pressure on the noseband, and then asking him to target. And there, I asked him to whoa before he got to the target, and he did. And I'm using really light rein cues for that. He has a really good whoa built in with just voice command and listening to my body language. So I'm hoping to kind of transfer that over to the reins.
Back up. Back up.
So he overshot the target there.
Target.
So I'm steering him back around.
Go.
There he goes. So I like to always carry my target stick with me just in case I need that for some extra guidance. But he was doing really well zigzagging through the stationary targets. So now I'm changing the pattern up a little bit and just kind of walking basically in a long oval around the perimeter of where I have these stationary targets set up instead of zigzagging back and forth. And that way I'm able to reinforce the rein cues with the targets without him just following the same exact pattern the whole time. If you have a horse that catches on quickly and you do the same pattern a couple times, it's really easy for them to get stuck in that pattern. And then here in a minute, I'm going to start
Walk on.
going
Whoa.
straight and then also turning from side to side. So kind of mixing and matching what I'm doing. And there he decided to zig over to the other side, which is not what I was asking for. And so I asked him to whoa, which he didn't. But then what he did, and I reinforced it.
Whoa. Wait. Target. Target.
With these stationary targets, I'm trying really hard to be very consistent of how I ask for them, because eventually I want to be able to phase them out and then also spread them further apart and use them for asking him to do bigger things and go longer distances.
Whoa. Good boy.
There, I asked him to whoa before he got to the target, and it took him a second, but then he did, which is great. We've worked on this stationary targeting enough that when I get them out, he immediately goes and touches all of them with his nose, which again is good, but that's why I built in that I don't reinforce it unless I have specifically said target. And sometimes I'll direct him towards a specific one with this activity. That's what I'm doing because I'm working on steering. But then other times I'll do this completely at liberty and just have a bunch of targets. And
Whoa.
then it doesn't matter which target he touches. So there I did not reward him because I asked him to whoa, and instead he went for the target. So then I asked him to walk on and asked him to whoa again, and he did, and so then I reinforced that. So I'm starting to bring in some other cues that he's learned, not just the steering and not just the stationary targeting, but I'm mixing in the whoa. We've already obviously been doing walk on. And it's important to make sure that each of those things is established really well before you start to mix them in like this. The only reason that I started adding the whoa in between is because we have a really strong reinforcement history for that, and I know that he knows that voice command. He just doesn't know it with the rein cue just yet. So I'm kind of adding that rein cue in when I ask with my voice and my body language.
Walk on. Target.
If you're doing ground training like this with reins, I highly recommend getting a nice short pair. I have these clip-on reins that are like, I think they're barrel racing reins, and they're super short, which makes it a lot easier for me to kind of one-handed steer from both the side I'm walking on as well as the opposite side. If they're really long, it can become a lot to manage. And so I recommend either tying them in a knot or just having them nice and short. So at this point, he's listening really nicely to
Walk on.
very little pressure. I'm trying to just hold the reins when I'm steering and pulling them one way or the other, just kind of lightly holding them between my thumb and my index finger so that I don't get overly aggressive and really pull his nose around. I want him to just feel that pressure and then turn that direction. And having those stationary targets there really helps reinforce that. When we've done this without using a target, it's kind of a mess. And we'll be able to phase those targets out later once he's really strong on that
Whoa.
steering cue.
Lift.
So I'm running out of treats. And so I asked him to whoa, and I'm taking off the reins because I need to go refill my pockets.
Mimic. Lift.
And I'm getting him to stay by asking him to do his crunches, which is one of his favorite activities.
Lift. Lift.
So I'm hoping he'll just stay there while I refill my pockets. I have lots of videos on my YouTube on doing the crunches that you see him doing here and some of the standing core work. So if you're interested in that, please check it out.
Finick. Lift. Lift.
He's definitely way more interested than my bag of treats than he is in doing his crunches. I use Timothy pellets for all my horses right now. I started out using sweet feed pellets, but that was a little too high value and they're not really good for them. I can feed as many handfuls of Timothy pellets to these guys without feeling like I'm going to
Finick.
mess
Lift.
up their nutrition or have
Lift.
any side effects from that.
Lift. More. Lift. Good.
So I sensed that he was kind of over the steering and targeting thing, so I went ahead and just decided to leave the reins off, and that way if he wanted to leave, he could, and it wouldn't be a big deal, even though he is wearing a bridle. It's
Shoulders
a
over.
Michelin without a bit, so it's basically a glorified halter. So here I'm asking for some shoulder yields, just to change it up a little bit. Again, this is something that we have worked on before. It's important not to mix in a bunch of things unless they are things that they're
Shoulders over.
pretty reliable with. So I could kind of feel him checking out a little bit. So I went over to adjust some of my equipment that I had laying on the ground so he didn't step on it. And then he just decided to leave, which is totally fine. This was a pretty long session already, and so that was a really good spot to end. So I hope you enjoyed this. If you have any questions or if there are any other types of training sessions you'd like for me to cover in this way, please drop me a message.